Hey everybody, Alex from SCADA Forge here. In this video, we're going to look at buttons in perspective. So first we'll come to our designer and create a new view. Call it buttons. I will leave as a coordinate container. We'll talk about containers in general in a future video. Hit create. That opens it up. We see our root container is a coordinate container and is currently the deep selected item in the tree. So anything we drag and drop will go into the root container right now. Similar to the vision video, we'll start with the simpler buttons. In this case, we have a checkbox and a toggle switch. Those are our quote-unquote Boolean or discrete buttons that are either on or off. Then we will dive into the one-shot button. That works basically the same way as in vision, where we set a value and we expect some other system to reset it. A multi-state button that gives us the ability to use one component to toggle multiple values using a button, and a radio group, which is similar to the radio buttons in vision. And then finally, we will look at the button, the generic button itself. You will notice in perspective, you do not have a momentary button like you do in vision. The easiest approach for that is to use either the generic button or a one-shot button with some code to reset values in your PLC once they're written from that value. That has more to do with the architecture of perspective than anything, because everything in perspective runs on the Ignition gateway server and is served as a web page back to your client, your browser, your phone, or whatever. So momentary functionality would be fairly difficult to replicate in that environment. So first we'll start with the simplest button, a checkbox. And we'll notice here, if we expand the arrow on the left, you can either have text on the right or text on the left, which gives you some out-of-the-box formatting options, as you'll see on some of the other button components here in perspective. So we'll just drag a text right field over to our root container, and we'll look at our properties pane. As with vision, you'll see a selected property, a text property, which is the text that we have displayed here next to the button or the checkbox itself. Text position, if it's enabled. You can also use different icons for the path to show if you're checked or unchecked using these icon values here. You can change those if you want to do a custom thing with like a green or red mark or some sort of other icon. And there's a list of icons available in the material section. If you look in the docs, it'll tell you what the paths are for all of those. And again, we have position, width, height, and rotation, and then all of our standard metadata. So we'll name this button checkbox so we can see it up here. We'll change our text to checkbox example. And just like in vision, the main item that we're interested in here is the selected property. So here we have a tag that we used in the vision video. We will copy that path for checkbox. You can either click the add binding icon, or you can right click and configure binding on that property. We will go to a tag binding. We will paste our path here that we copied from the tag browser. And we'll select bidirectional because we want that to write to the tag when we click the box. And then we'll hit OK. And currently that value is true. So it shows up as true, or the box is selected. If we go into play mode, we can uncheck the box. That writes our tag to false, and our selected value goes to false based on the binding. And if we check again, it goes to true. We'll go back into design mode. We'll look at our next Boolean button, the toggle switch. And this gives you options for no text, text right or text left. And that just gives you where the text is located. And similar to the checkbox, you can also change that here. In the property pane, if we want to put that on the left, or if you want to go top or bottom, you'll see that update over here. We'll leave that on right. We will drag a standard toggle switch to the screen. That does not default with a text value. We'll see here under the label property, We have a text value within that. Some of these you may need to look into the docs or just become familiar with what you're looking at in the property pane after using things to know where certain things are located. Like here, the text on the checkbox was its own property without a separate label field, and the toggle switch gives you some more components there, or some more properties there that you can bind to. So let's rename this button toggle. Let's give it text. And again, if we want to put that on the left, we can toggle the position property. And if we wanted to do something with the style, we could go into the style editor. We can change our font family, make it bigger or smaller. And let's say we want to make it bold. This will apply these CSS properties to the component and make it use the Roboto font of 16 pixels high and bold font weight. If we want to change that here, once you add these through the style class menu, you can edit these directly here. Otherwise, they won't show up, and you have all of these other options available to you in this menu. And we'll dive into CSS in future videos. That's more of a advanced concept that some people will use and get a lot of value out of, and some people may never look at it at all. As with the checkbox and Envision, we're mostly concerned with the selected property. Let's go to add a binding for that. We'll copy our tag path first. We'll grab our toggle tag path, bind that to a tag, bidirectional, and hit OK. We'll go to play mode. When we toggle, selected goes to 1 and toggle goes to 1. Looks like we're getting an error because this is an integer tag and it's expecting a Boolean. So one way we could handle that is we can edit the tag type to be a Boolean, and that will change this to true or false, depending on which selected state it's in. We can also change this back to an integer. We can go to our binding and we can do add transform. So this would be in the case of, say we have an integer tag coming from the PLC and we can't easily change that to be a Boolean for various reasons. This is where the power of a transform can come in. So in this case, you could do either a mapping, transform, format, script, or an expression. I would say 99.9% of the time I just use a script transform since that's most familiar. And that brings this configure transforms pane down to the bottom here. And we'll see our description, transform the incoming value and return a result, and parameters. These are the parameters that are passed from our tag binding into our transform. So we have self, current value, quality, and timestamp. So if we look at the standard script, this is going to define a function, take in those parameters, and simply return our value. If we look at the binding preview at the bottom, we'll see our current value. The arrow represents our transform, and the script value is what is returned. So in this case, we want to return a Boolean. So we would say if value return true, else return false. Now this will return true or false based on the value of the tag, which will get rid of that error that we saw on the toggle component. So now if we go to select and deselect, we'll see that our tag value is changing accordingly, and that does not give us a write back. So if we look at that, we'll see that our selected value is changing based on the tag binding that we have, but our tag itself is not being reflected here under toggle. Let's make sure. Yeah, Ignition 102 buttons toggle. That is our tag path. And you'll notice that the bidirectional here goes away. So looking at that, there's a couple different ways that we can handle this. We could either do a property change script here. We can add a change script. This gives us our parameters and a function. This will allow us to take the current value of that field and do something based on that. So if we wanted to, similar to the button example in the vision video, if we wanted to do a tag right here, we could do that. We can say if current value dot value system dot tag dot right, paste in our tag path, write a value of 1, else system.tag.write value of 0. And then we hit OK. And now, when we change this, we see our toggle tag value update. We're not selected, it's currently 0. We are selected, it is a 1. Okay, so doing the tag change or the property change script here gives us an icon that says there's an on-change script associated with this property. And it also shows here in the Perspective Components folder on that component that there's a script and a binding on that component here in the window. That does add a little bit of complexity to this component. Now we have a script here to manage. Another way to do that could be to set up a memory tag that we bind to directly here in the list, and then we use a tag change script to do that tag write based on the value of our selected property. And the memory tag change script would then write to the tag coming from the PLC or the other system as needed. That would be a different layer of complexity, and we could either set that up here in the scripting library under gateway events or in a perspective, or you could put it on the tag itself. But we'll talk more about tag change scripts in a future video as well. So for the time being, if you're doing a transform like that, probably the easiest way to do is a change script here, or change the tag if that's possible for you to do. Okay, so we'll go back to design mode, and we will dive into what I consider to be Boolean plus or discrete plus buttons. Basically the checkbox and toggle type functionality with some additional capabilities. We'll first look at the one-shot button. This gives us the option for a primary button, a secondary button, or a require confirm. This will pop up a confirmation request when we click on it. If you need that, that works great. Otherwise, the primary and secondary are based on project properties and basically give us a defined primary or secondary look and feel using CSS. So if you care about that, that's something that you can configure on the project itself or using CSS files. And you can also use the standard, like the primary button across the board, and apply style classes to that, or style parameters or properties as well. So if we click on that, we see the same properties that we have across the board. We'll call this button one shot. We have a value, a set value, if it's primary or not, enabled. And then a ready state, meaning we're ready to write the value. And then a writing state, which is what it will show while we're writing the value before we've reset it from the other system. And if we want to enable a confirmation, we can also do that here. So dragging over any particular component from the Perspective Components pane kind of simplifies and pre-selects some of these for you. And just to see, if we do a confirmation and we click one shot, it gives us a pop-up yes or no. And if we click yes, it will write the value of set value to our value property. And if we click and then we have to reset that manually since we're not tied to a tag in a PLC. And if we click no, it will not update our value property. So we will grab our one shot, copy that path. And the way that this works is our set value is what we're going to set that value to. So our set value will go to our value property when we have written the value. And then some other system will reset value back to 0, and our button will be able to be clicked again. So we want to put the binding on the value property. Back to tag binding, paste, click bidirectional, hit OK. Just for clarity, we'll make our set value 99. And we'll select the button so we can see the properties. We're currently at a value of 0, so we're ready in our ready state to write the value. We will click the button and disable our confirmation. We'll click the button, and that will write our set value to our value. And we see our tag value for one shot go to 99 here. Now let's say we wrote to a PLC, it is confirmed it received the value, and we're going to reset it. And it will go back to a waiting state to wait to be clicked on. So that's the one-shot button in a nutshell. Next, we will look at the multi-state button. This gives you an option for a column or a row, depending on which layout you want. So the column is what we saw by default in Vision, and a row aligns them horizontally instead of vertically. And we see that option here with the orientation property if we want to change that after we've added this component to the screen. We'll stay in column mode for now. Similar to, let's rename this to make it easier to see. Similar to Vision, we have a control value. That's what the button is going to control. And we have an indicator value that indicates what state that we're currently in. A little bit different from Vision, and we'll start to see this more and more across the board. We have a states array here with 3 options currently. We have hand, off, and auto buttons. We'll see that these map to the button graphics here on this component. Those give us text and a value, and this value is what will get written to our control value property when we click the button. And then we have a default selected and unselected style based on what is configured here. So if it's unselected, we basically take styling off. If it's selected, we change the background color to yellow for hand, red for off, and green for auto. We can click through this. Oh, we don't have our indicator value tied to anything. So that is writing our control value to 2, to 0, and to 1 based on the value property here on each of those buttons, but our indicator value is showing as 0. So we can add a property binding similar to what we did in Vision, and we find our multi-state button in the list, go to properties and find control value, and we will bind to that. This doesn't need to be bidirectional. Now our indicator value will match our control value. So if we click through this now, we'll see that this updates in real time. Finally, if we want to tie that to a tag, similar to Vision, we want to do a control value binding to our tag path, select bidirectional, and hit OK. Currently, that tag has a value of 15, which isn't mapped here, so we're not going to see anything. But if we were to go through and click, we'll see that that goes to 2, then it goes to 0, and it goes to 1. And we can see that down here in the tag browser. And then if we wanted to add an additional state, we hover over the states property and we click the plus button. In this case, this is a predefined value here, so it will automatically add the right data type with the right properties below it. So let's say we want to do test make this value 45, and let's change it. Using the style editor, we'll change it to a bluish purple color here when that is selected. And again, the selection and all of that is handled based on what the indicator value is set to, and we write to the control value, which based on the binding updates the indicator value. So if we were to click test, did not grab my first click. If we click test, we will see our background color updates. Now let's say we chose these colors and you can't really see the test text on there. So we want to go back to our text styles here, or to our style editor here. And let's say we want to make our text white instead of black. When it is selected, let's try that again. Let's change it to a different color first so it populates, and then we'll change it to white. And now we'll see that this will likely, it goes back to normal since we're not applying a property to it from there. So this gives us the ability to add additional states to our multi-state button, and this is arguably easier than going through the table in the vision system to be able to edit this. That's the multi-state button in a nutshell. Move that out of the way. Finally, we will look at the more advanced Boolean plus button, in this case, the radio group. Here we have text right, left, and multiple. If you wanted to do a single radio group, you do text right or left, and then you would have to manually add your additional radio buttons, or it would be generally pretty rare to have a single radio button in an interface. You can set up a radio group using the multiple option, and that will predefine three radios here under this radios property. And if we look at the single one, we'll see that we have one item under there, but we could easily go through and add however many we want. And those will populate with default values, and then we can expand this to see all of them. And that's similar to like how we looked at the label. If we make the text a lot bigger, you may have to resize the component to see all the entries. So we'll clear that out. Let's select our radio button, and we'll see all of the similar properties that we've seen across the board. Different than what we see in Vision. Here we have a value property. That is the value that we're getting from our selected items here. I believe that pulls in the value property here based on what's selected. We'll call these radio button 1, 2, 3. And we will change our text to reflect that. And we will resize our component so we have some more space. And then the index will give us the value of which of these radios is selected, either 0, 1, or 2. So if we were, right now we're selecting 1, it shows selected, and our value is 0 based on the index, or our index is 0 based on which is selected, and our value matches the selected value property. If we look at the second radio selected, our value updates to that value, and our index goes to 1, and the same for index 2. This is a little simpler than the vision system radio buttons, because you don't have to handle some of that in the system here, because it's all tied to our index value. And this could, in effect, work the same as a drop-down box with a label and a value displayed if you had a small number of selections that you wanted to move through. So in this case, if we go back to design mode, and we will use our index to add a tag binding, and we will just map that to radio option 1 for testing. Whoops. And we will select bidirectional. I did not hit enter. Buttons, radio option 1, okay. We'll hit enter and okay. We'll see that our radio option 1 tag here matches our index value. We'll go to play mode, we'll select that. Now we have index 0 because radio button 1 is selected. That goes to 0. And if we select radio button 2, that goes there. This also gets around the limitation in Vision where you have to use multiple containers to hold different groups of radio buttons, because we can simply add another radio button component and everything is handled within the component mapping itself. We don't have to worry about adding more radio buttons to this container, breaking this functionality. So it gives us some additional flexibility with maybe a little bit of extra overhead in terms of how things are set up, by giving us more options on the component itself, but overall is simpler than what we would have to do in Vision for the same functionality. Go back into design mode. And finally, we will look at the button itself. This gives us a primary and secondary option, similar to the one-shot button we looked at. That comes with predefined style layout there. We'll just look at the primary button there. And we did not rename radio. I'll just notice that. We'll just rename that while we're renaming our button. And we'll call this button. This also gives us some properties for images if we want to put an image or an icon onto the system or onto the button. If we click the little icon graphic there, we could put an icon. Let's say we'll add an alarm icon to that. We'll double click. That gives us an icon path here and adds an icon in front of our text. We can also move that to the right if we want. Put it on top, which we have to resize to see. And if we say we want to just have an icon, we can clear out our text field entirely and just leave the icon. And that's what the button with an icon looks like. Now, similar to the Vision option, this button doesn't really have any sort of value or anything that we can bind to it directly. So in this case, we want to go to configure events. This will give us all of the events that are possible with this button. That's a little bit different than in Vision where you would go to configure scripts. Here, this allows us to write custom scripts or message handlers, which we'll cover in a separate video. On this button, in this case, we want to go to events because that is what we're going to use. And similar to Vision, we have a ton of different options. Typically for buttons, I would use action performed. And once we select that event, we can do whatever we want actions-wise. We can tie into a bunch of different action types here. Similar to in the Vision side, we'll just use a script for this case. This is kind of a different way to look at the tab version of the Vision pop-up, where we could do navigation if we want to navigate to a specific page, or if we want to show a pop-up, we could do that. And you can configure multiple actions if you want to do multiple things with this, and they'll execute in order. If you accidentally add something and you want to get rid of it, just click the trash button. But we will just do a script here, and that will allow us to enter our Jython script here. Now, similar to the Vision video, let's actually do something mildly interesting with that. So let's add a text field. We have all these expanded. We'll just add a text field, and we will add a label from the display section. And let's bind this to our string value tag. We will copy that path. We will set our label property to match that, and we will set, that's still selected. We will set our text field property to match that as well. And that will actually bypass using the button. So let's take, let's actually remove this binding. We can right click and remove binding. Because what will happen with that is if we enter text here, it will automatically update the label, but we'll show an example of updating it with the button here. So within our script editor here, let's go to find a property. We could use the tag value if we want using a system.tag.read call, but we'll grab the text field text value, and we'll create a variable called text and set it equal to that. And then we will write our label props text equal to text. So now if we were to go put hello world here, our tag value updates. And then if we click the button, our label updates based on the script on the action performed event that we set up for the button. So there's some of the differences and honestly a lot of the similarities between the buttons in vision and perspective. I think the major difference between the two is the formatting of some of the properties, like we saw with the radio button giving us this array of radios instead of a table like in vision. It's similar to the states on the multi-state button compared to a table in vision. We also took a look at binding options. We did a little bit of work with transforms and did some scripting options on the button itself here with the generic button, and looked at a lot of the properties. So that's a pretty good run through all the button types in perspective with some basic functionality. Thank you for watching.